Aloha and welcome to episode 40 of That Time I Got Arrested. Hi. Whoa, 40. I mean, that's like a milestone, right? I'm old. I have persevered. I have survived all of this fucking shit, and it just keeps going. Like, even now in my real life, I am still surviving this shit. I'm still trying to find some semblance of stability and normalcy, and it's hard, man. It's so hard. I have such a tough time like getting all of the normal shit that people get just from having all of this stuff attached to my name and my social security number, and it's fucking hard, dude. It's hard. I'm struggling. I am moving back to Chicago, so I am like doing comedy again, and I just got booked for a show on November 4th, and I'll tell you guys more about that later, but I just want to say that I am so fucking grateful for all of your messages. I'm almost at the point where it's like, I don't even know who to mention right now, because I can think of 10 people who've like hit me up in the last week alone that I could say like, whoa, thank you so much. Like, I love you. Like, thank you so much. I love you. I love all of your messages. Every single person that messages me is like truly like one of my best friends. I'm like, well, you know me better than the people who know me. I mean, like Charlie, like Rory, I could go on, like Diana, I mean, shout out again, Kristen. I mean, the people who message me, like sometimes I fucking give them my phone number and like we text, and like now we're buddies. And so that's how I feel about you guys, is that like, you're my friend, you're my best friend. Please go online and write a review on iTunes. I've seen like 6 new ones, and I'm so grateful for those, but I need to see like 100 more. So where are all of you guys? What are you doing? Why are you listening if you're not going to write a review? And give us 5 stars, and tell your friends, and, you know, DM Duncan Trussell. Tell him that you want him on the show. Tell him that you want me on his show. I feel like him and I would have a killer conversation. And I don't even know how to say how much I love you at this point, you know? I don't even know how to like express the amount of gratitude and like, you know, just hard feels that I have for everything. I hope these episodes are okay. I like drink more and more as I podcast. I feel like comedy and drinking is like a beautiful marriage, and like I kind of flub my words and like repeat myself and like get a little silly, and like Aaron and I fight sometimes, and we get into it over like the content of these like podcasts and like the interviews and the episodes, because it's just like I don't know what I'm doing, but I hope you like it. And it's definitely like me being you know, like a crazy person that he has to like reel in. So it's like an interesting, it would be funny if you guys were all like sitting in here. Like I want you to know that like as you're listening to this, like I'm imagining you in the room with me, and you're like my best friend, and I'm telling you all of this stuff, and we're gonna like go get dinner later. This episode is about getting locked up again. My name is B. Casper, and my entire life has been a lie. That's not even my real name. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you all of my secrets. This isn't the story of how I became an orphan. This isn't the story about how I jumped off a 5-story building and survived. This isn't about how I died and came back funny. This is that time I got arrested. So I have to tell you about the worst thing ever. And I don't know if it's because everything that's happened to me in the last 18 months that this feels particularly awful, but something terrible just happened really recently to a really good friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a very long time. And I'll tell you all the dirty details in just a second. But that's really like the baseline, is something terrible happened to someone that I love. And I had this friend, and I've known him for a long time. You could say that I've known him forever. I've known this guy forever. And he was in jail. And he had been in jail for 8 months. And he had 2 weeks left. and he felt something pop in his head and he complained, and they put him in a cell by himself. And come to find out, he had a brain aneurysm and he ended up dying. He ended up going completely brain dead and was transferred to 3 different hospitals. And by the time I find out, he has like a day before they're going to put him into surgery for like organ donors. So I run, I race, I drop everything, I blow people off. I just make a huge deal out of like getting to this hospital before 9 p.m. so I can see him and say goodbye. And I see all my friends there that I haven't seen in a long time. And these are all people that I used to do illegal things with and didn't necessarily end on good terms with. So it was like a group of people that I had, you know, some unresolved tension with. And we are all looking at our friend who's already gone. And we play his favorite songs and we kiss his hands and we kiss his face. And I write him a note and I stick it under his pillow. He died in jail, you know? I'm not surprised that he went brain dead. I'm not surprised that he like heard something, complained, and then was like confined. Like none of that shocks me. That's just like, that's exactly what I would expect to happen in that situation. It breaks my heart that he had 2 weeks left and that he was such an awesome person. And I feel terrible that like the last time that I got to talk to him was me telling him to fuck off, you know? It's like I would have that threesome with you, you know? If he was still alive, like I would do it right now. I would do it in a heartbeat. And I also sent him a link to NA. I'm not like a total asshole. I really did love him. The last time I saw him, he came to the first comedy show that I ever had. I mean, I didn't even really get to see him that night, you know, but he came. He supported me. He was a real friend, and he was the funniest person I knew. He was way funnier than me. He was so smart, and his jokes were layered and complicated and interesting. And you might see this person and dismiss him as like a druggie or something, but he was a visionary, and he was better than all of us. And I like loved him, and I love him. And that was the fuck. That sucked. Everything sucks. Everything's hard all the time. But it's funny. It's like this last like hard death that I've gone through, and like a line of them, it's kind of like hurt me the most in a weird way. But it also made me feel like, I don't know, made me feel something. It made me feel a lot of things. It made me feel strong while feeling weak, you know, while feeling heartbroken. And just like, this is a pain I know very well. This is like something that I am beginning to really sort of figure out is like loss and like the feeling of lack. And oh man, I feel that so much. I feel like the world is like missing out on something really amazing. You know, he was really, really amazing. And I loved him. I love him. I loved him. So you guys know his name if you follow me online. If you don't, you should probably do that because he was funny. He's why I'm funny. He is funnier than me. It's like I have this joke about being a comedian and being like everyone's funniest friend. You know, I'm like all my friends' funniest friend, but like he was actually like our funniest friend. He was my funniest friend. Okay, you're in an internment camp. Nothing that happens to you matters. You are just like a body and a slave, and you know, you have like a number on your head, and that number is like the day you're going to get out, and it's also like your prison number, and it's also like how much money you have on your books. Like all of those things like matter in equal amount. It sucks because like, and I don't want to call him an addict because I think he was a visionary. I mean, he was a genius. Like his jokes were so funny and his jokes were so layered and smart and clever and interesting and weird. And you really had to, I don't know, have like a, you know, understanding of like basic like pop culture and like cultural like references, as well as, you know, being able like you have, what I'm saying is you'd have to pay attention to understand what the genius of his jokes were, because otherwise that didn't make any sense. But they were actually so smart that they made such perfect sense that you're like, what the fuck are you even saying? You know, so it's like he was such a smart kid. It was so weird. You know, he just liked to be high all the time. And like, I don't even know what demons he was dealing with, because he was like one of the happiest people I ever met. He was just like so effervescent, you know, he always had like something funny to say or something funny going on, or he just like had like a cool thing that he was like trying to get you turned onto, and whether that was like music or a person or like a funny show or just like something silly that he like heard, it was always like a good time. The last time I saw him was like in a car. He like picked me up from work and he drove me like an hour and a half in traffic home, and we like traded doses because I had like gel tabs and he had like paper, and he like took them while we were driving. And that was the last time I saw him. And like he was like saying like a bunch of weird things, and it was weird because it was like he said Beyonce should have won the Stanley Cup, and this was like right around when the Grammys happened, and Beyonce like didn't win the Grammy, and then like and then the Hawks that year like didn't win the Stanley Cup, so he was kind of like marrying these two losses that like could have and should have been like sure wins, you know, and turning it into like just a funny joke. Like that's funny when someone can take two things that like are seemingly unrelated and then make it into like a funny little something, you know. That stuck with me for years. It's weird. It's like the night before I found out any of this stuff, I was like thinking about that line, and I used to think about that line for years and just laugh uncontrollably, and then also be like, I'll never think of anything that's that funny and like that clever, you know, like as a comedian, it's like I'll never be that good. And then the next day I like found out about all that shit about him. Time to tell you some BTS stuff, right? Behind the scenes, not the Korean pop group, but I'm going to tell you some behind the scenes info about the podcast. I'm going to tell you like the birth of the podcast. I'm going to tell you like the origin story right now. So when I got out of jail and I was knowing that I had like a month between going to jail and going to rehab, I met up with my friend, and it was like August and it was my birthday. I hadn't seen Lauren since before I even left for Asheville. So I hadn't seen her in a couple of years, and I was filling her in on everything that had happened since the last time I saw her, to getting arrested, to going to prison, to getting out of prison. And because she was such a close former friend of mine, I was really letting it all out. I was telling her everything. There was no detail I was leaving behind. And by the end of me talking to her for maybe like 20 minutes or a half hour, she stopped me and she grabbed my hands. And I remember this like vividly, of her saying like, "Oh my God, you need to be a storyteller." And I just kind of like laughed, and I was like, that's so stupid. I'm like, in my head, and what I said out loud was like, that's such a fucking stupid thing to say. Like, that's not a real job. But that sounds like thanks. I'm glad that I'm entertained. And I even said this to her. I'm like, I'm glad I'm entertaining you with all of my fucked up bullshit, but that's not a real job. I'm like, if only I could do that for real, you know, I would be so great at it, obviously, but that's not a real job. And I'm saying that because it's recently I've been getting so many messages from so many different people every single day being like, hey, I love your podcast. I love the sound of your voice. Blah. I love like the way you tell stories. Blah. I love like the fucked up shit that you say. Blah. It's just like, that's obviously, I'm like flattered and so grateful. And I'm so happy that you are with me and that you really feel, you know, like who I am and how I am, because sometimes I say shit that's fucked up and I have to like really fight to like get it out there, you know, because I'm like not cool or perfect all the time. But I like want you all to see that. And it's really funny because I'm going to tell you the story about what happened and me going to rehab today. But like this point in my life, this is like the first time where I'm sitting somewhere and I'm telling someone about everything that just happened to me. And they're like, hey, you should like do that. You know, you should like do that as like a thing that you do. And then I did it like several years later. So I guess this is a really like hokey way of me saying like, you guys should pay attention to the things that people are telling you to like do that. Like, hey, well, you should do that. And then that's like, you know, like you don't know that that's like the thing that you were meant to do. I didn't know I was like meant to like like be a podcaster. That's like it's not even a real word. That's so stupid. I mean, like, I love that. And it's like my dream job, obviously, but I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I didn't even know that this was something that I could do as like a thing and then call that my thing. And like, now I can like legitimately say like, hey, that's my thing. Cause like you're sitting here like listening to me do my thing and you seem to like it because I get your messages and I'm like, hey, I love you too. I love you too so much. I love you too so much. Everyone who says they love me, I just want you to know that I love you too. I love you so much too. And you're actually my best friend because you know me better than everyone else. I know I feel like I just don't have it in me today. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I just don't have it all in me today, but I'm going to try my best to explain what this was like. You know, I guess I am sort of touchy over calling it like, oh, I went back to jail, or like, oh, you went back to jail, or like, oh, are you getting ready to go back to jail? Because yes, fucking yeah, that's exactly what it is. But basically it was like a 5-star hotel compared to what being in jail was actually like. It was different, but it was the same. And it was not at all similar, but it was like literally exactly almost the same because it was in the same place. And you know, you had similar rules and you were, you know, basically behind bars and on the property of actual Cook County Jail. But rehab in Division 17 in Cook County Jail is not technically jail. I mean, it's rehab, but it's also jail. But I mean, it's like rehab in jail. And it fucking sucked. I start my whole ritual over again. I do drugs. I have sex. I gather all of my books. I find some really comfy sweatsuits. I turn myself in, and it's not like traditional jail, so I get to have a couple extra privileges, like having my own, you know, personal possessions. Same as everything, I got to have my own underwear and shirts and clothes and shoes, but I still had to strip down. They went through every single thing that I brought in. They threw out stuff that I wasn't allowed to have. I tried to, you know, bring in contraband even. I had chocolate. I had like hidden chocolate in my bag because it was like dark cacao, 70% like heady chocolate from Whole Foods, and they threw it out, and I was like, that was $8, but whatever. I have fought with Aaron over this all night, but I want to say verifiably, in my own opinion, rehab did not get me sober. At this point in my life, you know, I went to rehab high. I like showed up and they were going through my stuff and I was turning myself in and I was high as fuck because obviously why wouldn't I be? I'm not a fucking idiot. I'm dumb, but I'm not a fucking idiot. So I was high, and then when I went into actual rehab, it wasn't any different than jail. I could get any and every drug I could ever hope to want or see. I mean, I couldn't smoke a joint, but everything else, it was there, yeah, at my own disposal. The first time I ever saw anyone shot up was in jail. You know, I could have been high as a kite. I could have been crushing up pills and doing the same thing that I had been doing for the last 8 months. That wasn't what stopped me from using, and that wasn't what got me sober. I don't really like that word. I've only been sober for 6 months, so I do 90 days in rehab, and then I do 90 days after rehab, and that's the only amount of time that I've ever really spent sober since I was, like 13? So this is like my period of sobriety, but I'm going to tell you, it wasn't because I went to rehab, even though that's a point of contention. Maybe if you're listening, maybe if you're, you know, my producer, that's like not something we're going to necessarily agree upon. But the thing is, it wasn't about going to rehab. It wasn't because I like couldn't access the drugs anymore, because I could. And it wasn't because I was in a program that was helping me figure out coping skills so that I didn't want to access drugs anymore, because I did want that. But at the same time, it was like this weird switch that flipped inside my head. Like once I got into rehab, once I got back to Cook County, once I was in jail again, once I was locked up, once I didn't have a cell phone, once I was kind of away from everything, you know, it's not like I didn't want to do drugs, but it's like I wasn't gonna. I just decided that I wasn't going to. Just like I decided that I wasn't going to have like a lesbian relationship while I was in prison. I just decided one day that that wasn't what I was fucking interested in. And then I didn't do it any longer. And I realized that that's not a common thing to say. It's not like a normal drug addict can sort of randomly decide that they're just going to stop using or stop feeling like they want to use. But in that moment, in those moments, in that 90 days, in that, 180 days that I spent not using any drugs or any alcohol or anything, I just decided that I didn't want to, and then I didn't anymore. That was just what happened. There wasn't any secret. There wasn't any surrendering to a higher power. It wasn't because I was in meetings from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. It wasn't because I was in this like shitty bullshit state-funded like rehabilitation program for repeat offenders. That wasn't something that like worked on me. And it wasn't like, oh, you're in an AA meeting now, so all of a sudden you're like, done being reckless and stupid and self-destructive. Like, no, like nothing magical happened. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't like, this like transformation. It wasn't some sort of like epiphany that I had. I didn't find Jesus. Like nothing special happened. I just figured out one day that like, that was the day that I was not going to use until it was, easy or appropriate or something that was like conducive to my life. And I'm not going to lie. Like when I got out of rehab, I definitely thought about smoking pot every day for a long time. I would have dreams about it. And it was like weird, I was on intensive drug probation and I used to have dreams about violating because I would like smoke pot at a party and then I'd have to like go and do a drug test and I'd be like, oh no, I smoked pot at this party, but it was just a dream. And so it was like definitely on my conscious mind, but I didn't use for 180 days without any help or any sort of like, structure from anything else other than the fact that like one day I woke up and I decided that wasn't, something that I was going to do until I was going to do it again. So I don't know what that means. And I don't really know what that says about me other than I'm probably a psychopath.
Or rehab help.
So I brought my own books. I brought my own clothes. I tried to smuggle in some chocolate. That didn't work. It sucked. I lived in a room with 7 other women. So there was 8 of us total. So it was 4 bunk beds in one room. And everyone was really, nice and friendly and sort of like, I don't know. They all seemed weird. Like, how people who are like in a program seem after a certain amount of time. And I got there and I was just starting and everyone else who had, already been there had been there for longer. So they had less time to do. Some were close to being finished and some were right in the middle. And, some had only been there for a week or two, but we were all kind of like at different spots, but in exactly the same place, where we wanted this to get over. We had all already been to prison. We had violated some kind of probation or parole. So this was sort of our last chance. We really need to make this work. So there was this very strong air of desperation, sort of surrounding the room. I had cut my hair really short again so that I could deal with the 4-minute showers and not get beat up as much. I was surprised to find that there, wasn't the same kind of sexual violence in the rehab, but there was definitely the same sort of drug trade. So it was interesting. It was like, I didn't have to worry about getting raped, but I definitely had this element of like, I'm in rehab. Do I want to use the money that I have for food or for drugs, and God, those meetings were long, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Monday through Friday. Like, it would have been nice to like have a Zan to like sit for all of those. Like that would have been chill. But I had already made that decision that I wasn't using drugs. I didn't need to like decide. It was like already sort of internally decided for me that like that wasn't what I was going to do. So I just had to sit and suffer instead. Oh God, it was awful. It was like we did an hour of AA, we did an hour of NA, we did an hour of Prostitutes Anonymous, where girls would just talk about, you know, their stories of being prostitutes on the street. And that was really crazy because I would just like, you know, sit there for an hour and then listen to like the crazy, like anything that I have to say that I think is like wild. I would sit there and listen to the craziest stories that you've ever heard, like shit you could not even make up, you know, shit that you couldn't even think of, shit that you'd hear that was so wild that you're just like, there's no way that that's fucking real. But I mean, it was real to them, you know, as real as their mental illnesses were, or as real as what actually happened to them was. And it's like, I wasn't there, so it's not like I can say any of that shit ever really happened, but I know that I believe them, you know. It's like I've been in and out of the system enough to know that what they're saying is totally plausible and real, and just, you know, cops and politicians and, you know, dirty, like dirty people who work for the government basically are what sort of makes the lower income sides of bigger cities, you know, work. Like they're just as in it as they are, you know, responsible for it. Like they're a part of it. They're responsible for it. They're responding to it because they're the ones that are putting people in and out of the system. So they're intertwined with it in a way that we can't even really imagine or understand. So you're hearing all these fucked up stories from all these prostitutes and you're just like, yeah, totally, dude. Like, I know that's real, but I can't even believe that that's real. We had Seeking Safety, which was all about domestic violence and how to get yourself out of domestically violent situations, which is not something I had any firsthand experience with. But, you know, I grew up as like a child of domestic violence abuse. I watched my mom get hit by every boyfriend and husband, including my father, that she like ever had. So it's like I totally understood that. But the way that they approached it, like sucked, you know. It wasn't realistic, it wasn't practical, it didn't, you know, seem accessible to the people that it was being presented to. It was just sort of this outdated material that was, you know, earnest in its effort, but it didn't have any like real life advice that was helpful to people that was actually being applied to. So it just like sucked. It was just like this sad, you know, like Schoolhouse Rock material that like wasn't like Schoolhouse Rock was better than, you know, the like rehabilitation services that they had. And then they had like these meetings like towards the end of the day that would be about like how to make a resume or like how to get a job. And it was so clear that there were kind of two camps, you know. There were these people who had never had jobs, nor would they ever have jobs. And then there were these people that were sort of like more privileged and had access and were capable of like finding employment, you know? So like me, I was lucky enough to have a job lined up for when I got out of rehab because I like had an uncle who was capable of like hiring me where he worked, you know? But like a lot of these people, a lot of these women didn't have jobs, and their job was basically learning how to like work the system so that they could get, you know, like food stamps and social security and like disability and like you know, like monetary assistance from the government. And that was their job, is like figuring out how to like game the system so that they could get as much money as they possibly could. And in one aspect, you're sort of like, man, that's fucked up that you're like living off the system. And in the other aspect, you're just kind of like, yeah, that's like the only thing that you're capable of doing when you have no education and no resources and no one will hire you. Like, what the fuck are you supposed to do? You know, it's like, obviously you have to like game the system, and then you think like, yeah, good for you. So it's just this constant like breaking down of stereotypes that you have grown up with, you know. I'm talking about myself here. It's breaking down these stereotypes that I've grown up with in like a upper middle class, like white, you know, suburban sort of like upbringing versus like this actual real world, like living below the poverty line, living in low income, living in like poorly educated, and like living in like the shitty parts of the world, and like the parts of the world that are actually just, you know, your neighbors. Jennifer and Krista, they were like my friends. They were like my homies. They were the girls that I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner with. They were my age. They had brown hair. They had been to prison. One was there for a DUI. One was there for heroin. And I don't think it was an armed robbery, but it was like a burglary or a robbery or something. It was her and her boyfriend, and it was his dad's house. And they stole a check or something like that. I mean, heroin, whatever, makes you do wild and crazy things, right? So the three of us were sort of like these little punk rock white girl degenerates who had been hardened by the system, but recycled into this sort of like ragtag team of like companions, food companions. We just ate together and we told each other stories and we kept each other sane, you know, and we sort of like passed notes in these long, egregious meetings that meant nothing and were sort of just like a waste of time, you know. And we were all suffering from different ranges of addiction. And we all were like meeting each other and forming this relationship at probably one of the only periods of time that we were all like ever sober. Like I was sober because I decided to be, and the other two were sober because they had to be. You know, I had money and I could have like bought drugs while I was in rehab, but I chose not to. And these girls had to be sober because they didn't have a choice. So it was like we all were meeting each other on the same level, but it was different. It's different when you decide, and it's different when like it's forced upon you. So one day they were like painting the inside of the jail, of like the part where we were in our rehab center, and they were like painting the windows, and they were doing this sort of pseudo construction type of work, and there was like these horrible fumes, and there was no air, and it was stagnant, and it was summertime. It was hot. It was fucking hot, dude. It was so hot, and there was no air conditioning, and we were all having to sit in this like AA meeting and talk about our fucking feelings while we're being suffocated to death by these terrible fumes. Me and these two girls, Krista and Jennifer, we complain. We like go to the, you know, head BIC, and we tell her that we can't breathe, which is absolutely true, and that we can't concentrate, which is like irrelevant, and that we, you know, need to be excused or be allowed to like have some fresh air, which, you know, is valid, but we definitely didn't like have, I don't know, like good intentions. You know what I mean? Like we were sick of rehab. Like we were sick of like sitting in the same room for 12 hours every day. Like we were sick of being in this sort of like structured system, and we saw like a loophole. So we were like, actually get the fuck out of here, you know, just for like a little bit. Like let us go lay down. Like let us go outside. Like let us be in a different room. Like let us just like escape the monotony of this fucking dumb bullshit that means nothing to any of us. You know, rehab is a lie, just like jail, just like, you know, healthcare. Really, it's all just a lie that we're telling ourselves collectively as a society. So we complain, and of course that doesn't like go over well. Yeah, they really fucking thought nothing of us, you know, and decided that we were troublemakers and that we deserved to be punished for complaining, which, you know, like valid. It's not like we really gave a shit about these fumes, but we really wanted to get out of like our fucking, you know, obligation, our legal obligation to be there. So they saw right through us and they punished us, you know, rightfully so. But it sucked. They separated all of us. They put us all into different units. So like now we never saw each other all day. And now we were placed into an entirely new environment. We had to like move all of our shit. And it was like, you know, it was like getting in trouble and getting sent to the principal's office as a kid. But now it's like much more serious and you're an adult. And those consequences are like the tiny bit of stability and comfort that you had, which was like these two girls that I got to sit with and eat my meals with and sort of commiserate with. It's like now I don't even have that anymore. And it just, oh God, God, rehab sucked so bad. It sucked so bad that I actually went as far as to call my uncle, my lawyer uncle, over and over and over again. It's like I didn't buy commissary for 2 weeks because all I did was buy phone cards so that I could call him and keep calling him and be like, set a court date, get me out of here, put me back in jail. I was like, anything else, you have to get me out of here. I can't like do this anymore, because really, really, truly, being in meetings all day sucked, because I didn't stop using drugs because I was in meetings. I stopped using drugs because one day I decided to stop using drugs. You know, I still could have been high. I could have been high and I could have been in meetings all day, but instead I decided to stop using drugs, and I was in meetings all day and I needed the meetings to fucking stop, you know? So I called my uncle. I called him over and over again. I called him for days on end. I wrote my grandparents a long letter about how awful it was in rehab. And I just was the squeaky wheel who complained. I was like flexing that white privilege. Now I was aware that it existed and I needed it to work in my benefit. So I had a court date, you know, filed by my uncle, and I got to go see a judge, and I had an opportunity to convince him that I did not belong in rehab, and instead I would like to be transferred to the mental health unit that was in Cook County Jail to serve the rest of my time. Then that's what I did. So I'll tell you about that next, you know? Fucking going back to jail, but not really. This series. Just kidding, I love you. Bon voyage.